All right, guys. So we're going to be talking about how she was able to retire at 39 years old with $600,000. So without further ado, let's get straight into this particular video.
To a friend who invested in real estate, and I realized that I could pick up houses pretty cheaply in Ohio. I purchased my investment property for $17,000 and sold it for around $75,000, and my own home I purchased for $84,000 and sold for around $125,000. I gotta tell you, I hated flipping houses, and that's when I learned that.
So right off the bat, she told you how she started to build wealth buying houses, for example, $16,000. Turning around and then selling them for 75. If you do the math on that, that's a nice amount of profit that you're able to allocate to other things. And so, from that perspective, I think for me personally, even though I do own real estate, I do think that the easiest way is to really get into the stock market, dollar cost average, get into mutual funds, ETFs. But a lot of people make it big with real estate.
What might work really well for another person from a financial perspective isn't going to work for everybody. The investing strategy that's worked best for me has simply been investing in mutual funds. So I'm very much in the stock market, hands off, give it to a brokerage firm, invest it in one of their mutual funds, set it and forget it. So after I was laid off in 2009, it really hit me how much debt kind of controlled me, in that, like, I had to go to work, I had to find a job because I had to pay off this debt. And so when I got another job, my main focus with my money became paying off my debt. What I did was I really stayed focused. I paid one thing at a time, stayed focused on it, and I didn't get distracted by shiny things. As I earned more money, I just put it all towards my debt. I lived what you might describe as a FIRE lifestyle without actually knowing that FIRE existed. Once I got in the habit of squirreling money away towards my debt and like pushing it aside, then I just got in the habit of like pushing that same amount of money aside every month. And as it grew, as my income grew, I just pushed a larger amount of money to the side. So at first it was to my debts, and then it was towards, when there was no debt left, it went to my investments.
So yeah, that's a great bit of advice. So the less debt you have, obviously, the more money you're able to either save or invest. But when you have a large accumulation of debt, most of what you make is probably going to go to that debt and away from yourself. So again, she's explained how she was able to build wealth with real estate, and now she's talking about paying off debt, which in turn goes into paying yourself. And so now we're starting to see how this wealth is starting to accumulate.
Without the layoff, I would still be there. And even with the layoff, I was second guessing my decision to go travel. I don't think I would have gone to take a career break if I didn't have the therapist I did. She was like, if you don't go now, you're never gonna go. I traveled to 44 cities and I think 23 countries in my 1 year of my career break. But in that time, I came to Mexico City, I think 3 times in that year. It was the only city that I repeated. And I just really loved how I felt when I was here. I loved the energy of the city. My plan after my career break was to go right back and find a job. I'd be in a better mood, and I'd go back to a different job, and things would be fine. But traveling and seeing that the way we work ourselves to death in America is not common around the world made me realize that I could have a different life if I made the choice to have a different life.
And that's true. So take it from a person that's been to Cote d'Ivoire, also known as Ivory Coast in Africa. I've been to Brazil, Colombia, all over Europe, Canada, Mexico. I mean, you name it. I've learned that if you've got $10,000, there's somewhere in this world you can retire. If you got $20,000, there's somewhere you can retire, so forth and so on. So the problem is we get so accustomed to living where we're actually born, when you can have a life full of luxuries in another country. Okay, so yes, the U.S. is a great country that's filled with opportunities, but that doesn't ultimately mean that you have to stay there. Um, and so another thing that I've noticed too is the happiest people that I've seen in the world have the least amount of possessions, if that makes sense. They live a carefree life. They're not worried about impressing other people, and whatever income they have, they spend it on the necessities, which in turns makes them have a fulfilled life. And a lot of times, what a lot of people do for work in other countries, not saying that that's not how it is in America, but a lot of their jobs have purpose. So they're happy, they get what they need to live the type of lifestyle they want to live, and they go on about their merry about their lives.
I always say that I accidentally retired. I paid off all my debt, I saved money, and then when I realized I didn't want to work again, I did the math. I looked at my investments, and I had about $500,000 saved and invested. And I knew I was going to get another like 150 in stocks from a company I used to work for. I knew I had about 660,000 because I knew I didn't want to go back to work. That was enough. It was enough for me to live comfortably in Mexico City or another country for a while.
Yep.
If I was in the U.S., would I have decided that was enough? Probably not.
Yep.
America
Wow.
doesn't really tell us when enough is enough. People who want to retire, they have to, on their own, decide how much money they need in order to retire. Where you want to retire, what your lifestyle is going to be, what your expenses
Lifestyle,
are.
guys.
But that's all part of doing the
Lifestyle.
math that I described earlier. In a typical month, I spend about $2,300 to live in Mexico City. While the cost of living in Mexico is cheaper than the U.S., the cost of living in Mexico City is higher than a lot of Mexico. So it's a cheaper city to live in, but it's not necessarily a cheap city to live in. One of the things I love to do in Mexico City is exploring the neighborhoods. They're usually really great places to hang out with my friends and to see, kind of like look in on what the neighborhood is doing. And I have a couple of favorite dessert places in town, including some gelato shops that I love. I do have a temporary visa. I have a visa for 1 year. It's a residency visa. I came down initially on a tourist visa, and I rented my apartment while I was on a tourist visa, and I did everything while I was on a tourist visa. But I knew I wanted to stay here, and I didn't want to keep making trips back to the States to stay here, so I got my temporary residence visa, and I will renew it, and then in 4 years, I can get my permanent visa.
So yeah, guys, in a nutshell, here's the question I have for you guys. If you want to retire early, are you willing to give up a certain lifestyle in order to do that? Are you willing to go somewhere else to retire early? Is where you live necessarily more important than you retiring early? I want to know what you guys have to say about that in the comments. So ultimately, guys, real estate is a good way to get a nice cushion of wealth. Then obviously you got mutual funds, you got ETFs, you got index funds, and I would say investments that track the S&P 500 is you just can't go wrong with it, guys. You just have to have patience. Don't look at the investments every day. Continue to be consistent with what you're investing. Increase what you invest as you make more, and you'll look up and you'll be retiring early. So that's what I got for you guys today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'm out, guys. Peace.